Hi everybody, welcome to another lesson here. This one wasn't really scheduled, but I thought it was really fun, really interesting, and I wanted to really share this with the rest of you as well. You see, last week, I was actually asked to teach a lesson within the Bible study group I'm currently a part of. The week prior to that, I actually was finishing up a lesson for my own degree work. And there was one in particular that stood out to me. And if we go back to that little title screen, you'll see it. The lesson from the widow's mite. And here we actually have the wrong screen. Secondary banner. We have it all missed. There we go. That's much better. I apparently failed to prep the images beforehand. But anyway, so I took a lesson, and I was like, wow, this is really rich. And it's not that I didn't know anything about this, but it really gave a better perspective of this. And I was like, wow. And it was really wonderful. And it was, of course, a lesson about the widow's mite was put in there. And a lot of us know this story, but really, I don't think we do. Because, and I say this, and I have to be very firm on this, it was really interesting, and I did some digging myself, and I came to the same conclusion. You see, I put together the lesson to give to the Bible study group, and then what I do, and then including the past lessons I've done over biblical elements, is I'll put together my notes as far as what I'm going to be discussing, and then after I do that, I like to compare it to another minister. I listen to some sermons, and I want to make sure that what I'm understanding about the text and what I'm preaching about the text is accurate. So I actually found something rather interesting about this, but we're not going to get into it right now. In fact, I don't have my Bible. However, thankfully, I do have my phone. So I want to read this to you, and then we're going to open this up. We're going to open up this study and kind of go over it. Let's see, Luke 21, if you guys want to follow along. I don't have it prepared on the screens for slides. It's only in a couple verses here. It says here, Luke 21, verse 1 through 4, Jesus looked up and he saw the rich, putting their gifts into the offering box, and he saw a poor widow put in 2 small copper coins. And he said, "Truly I tell you, this poor widow has put in more than all of them. For they all contribute out of their abundance, and she out of her poverty and all she had to live on." So one of the common issues, well actually I don't want to get to that just yet because I want to leave that for the surprise. But anyways, as I was doing my studies, preparing for this, thankfully all of this really came to turn about to really be on point. But I learned something rather interesting. And upon my lesson that I've taken for my degree, I actually found myself really fascinated by this. So I had to look it up. This alone, I got this from Hobby Lobby. Little chest, really actually nice chest, I think, is probably one of my favorite ones of it. And then inside, you can't see it, but if I take this out, we have what is called, I don't know if you can see it too well, we have what is called a widow's mite. Now, the widow's mite was actually one of the smallest of value coins in which they had in that point of time, the biblical era. These pretty much date back to the 1st century. I don't know how far back they go. They could possibly go back even further. But the widow's mite, really small piece. I don't think I have a penny on me right now. Okay, it's about the size of a penny. However, the value of it is a lot less than a penny. It's actually 1/8. 1/8 of a penny is how much I hold right here. So if I want to get 1 cent, I obviously have to hold about 8 of these here in my hand. And there's not 8, there's more than 8. And I did a calculation. What I hold in this box is only equal to, let's see if I can't get that image up there. There's a little bit. So you can kind of get a rough idea how much is there. And I did the calculation. By comparison, if each of these equals 1/8 of a cent, I only have about 16 cents right here. I don't even have a quarter. And what I thought was very fascinating about this, and I want to give you the math here. These 2 Judean mites, let me actually get this on the bigger screen so that way you can get a better image. 2 Judean mites, which is what these little coins are, equals 1 quadrant, which is, equals 1 quarter. Does it equal 25 cents? No, it does not. Or at least not by our comparison. So it equals one quadrant, and these 4 quadrant equals 1 as. Yes, I said as. That's what the terminology was. And this 1 as, also 16 of these equals 1 denarii. And these 1 denarii is actually valued of 1 day's wage. That's how much a denarii was. And I actually ordered a replica of, these are replicas by the way, I ordered a replica of denarii, 2 denarii actually, that were used in that point in time. One of them was from, I think, about 20 or so BC to 14 AD, and the other coin that I ordered was from about 14 AD, I think until about 60 AD or so. But I ordered these because I thought it was really wonderful, really cool piece of history to have on hand. But this 1 denarii, 1 day's wage. Now, I did the math, and if I did it right, I hope I've done it right. This 1 denarii, based on a $12 an hour for 8 hours, that comes out to be $96, and this is before taxes gets taken out. But you've just made 1 denarii. That 1 denarii, when you break that down, that divided by 16 asaris equals approximately $6 in comparison. And those $6 would equal 4 quadrants, which breaks down, of course, to be about $1.50 per quadrant. Now, if you were to break that down even further, you've got 1 quadrant equals 2 mites. That's 75 cents. So it does not equal a lot. So by comparison, what's happening here is this woman, this woman who is putting money into the temple, she's only putting in about 75 cents at best. Not a lot. But even so, what we find is that this is all she had. We found that, I think, if I can pull this up here again, open up my Bible app. For that, in verse 4, she put all of her poverty out of her poverty, put in all she had to live on. All she had. Now, what's interesting about this is we often use this lesson as a means of saying she had enough faith. She had enough faith to put everything she had into this. And, you'll see some heretics that'll try to say, is like, well, you see this woman, the one who put the widow's mite in there, she put everything in. But there's nothing in the scriptures to really support that she had enough faith. In fact, it was really, kind of stupid to ignorant, however you want to, whatever you want to do there. It's quite foolish of her to put these 2 mites into the temple offering. I mean, it really tells you that she was suckered into this religion itself. And we'll get to that here in a moment. But she puts the last 2 coins. I've just dropped one. There we go. Okay. She puts the last 2 coins that she has into the temple offering. This is all she has to live on. Everything, her shirts, her clothes, her brand new car she just purchased, everything she has been liquidated, and she has 2 coins. We know this because Jesus says she put in all she had to live on. She had nothing else. Nothing else. There's nothing in the text that really says she had good faith. There's nothing positive said about this woman, and the only thing we know is that she put everything. And I'm convinced by that that she was really suckered into it. I actually learned this from a sermon. This was the piece, and so what happens here is this lesson we get from the widow's mite. we often attribute, having enough faith, putting, so much into this, giving it all kind of concept. And it's a good principle to live by. However, we're really focusing on the wrong element, I would say, the wrong element of the lesson. And I want to get to that later on. And I hope you guys can kind of draw this out as we continue on in this study. So the question that I want to ask as we bring this up, what do we use, or what if we don't use what the Lord gives us? I mean, you got to think about that. How much have you been blessed? And the principle we need to really apply here is, God has given me these things. What can I do to glorify Him? That's essentially the base core of this lesson. Now, the first thing we want to address here is Matthew chapter 5. And it says here, this is also the summary. This is not the whole thing. I'm sorry, it is the whole thing. And this is referring to the parable of the talents. We have two men who received elements, and they did this. They took their talents and they invested it and got portions back. And they were received, the Lord said, their master said, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." And in this one here, this is the last response, the last servant who received, but they did not do anything with it. And the response, how the servant responds after receiving the coins, and after he. When the master comes back, it really shows that this individual was not a true believer. They were a part of the house, so to speak, a part of the community, but what they were given, they did absolutely nothing with. And we see this here. Here's his response. He also, who had received 1 talent, or at least for our illustration, we'll use 1 mite. The talent itself was a weight of measurement of portions. So he received 1 talent and came forward, saying, "Master, I knew you to be a hard man." And keep that in mind. I bolded that out for you. He believed him to be a hard man, reaping where you did not sow, and he gathered where you scattered no seed. So I was afraid, and I went to hide your talent in the ground. Here you have what is yours. You can have your talent back. What his master answered him, he said, "You wicked and slothful servant. You knew that I reap where I have not sown, and where I gather where I have no seed. Then you ought to have invested my money with a banker, that at my coming I should have received what was my own with interest." So in other words, the servant is reprimanded for doing absolutely nothing. One, he had a wrong view of the master. The master in the parable is God. So he believes the master himself to be a very hard man, a very hard, crude man. So rather than investing and putting it into the bank and getting something back out of this, he says, "Okay, I'm just going to hold on to this. I'm not going to do anything with it. I'm going to keep it here for when the master gets back. Let him take care of it, so to speak." So he has a wrong perspective on the master himself by saying, you reap where you do not sow. The problem is, God always sows and God always reaps. So he had a wrong interpretation of God. He was afraid of God. He had fear, and fear itself is good to have, but this kind of fear really is a negative perspective. It's, fear, and I don't know how best to describe that, but it's a negative fear of the consequences and what would happen. So he had a wrong understanding, I feared you. And the other 2 parables, or the other 2 servants, they, of course, had some sort of fear, a reverence, and they decided to do what they do to God. Or they decided to use what the master has given in order to gain something back. The master, you don't really, in this time, it would be really foolish, because these men, they weren't just servants, they were slaves, doulos. It would be foolish to simply give a coin, you've done really good, well done. I'm going to stop touching that. I'm going to drop it again. So the master's really giving these things. It says, "Hey, I'm giving you something, and I want you to do something to glorify me. I want to get something out of this." And this gentleman, he received nothing. He did nothing with it. He is being accused of being wicked and slothful. Why? Because he did absolutely nothing to glorify the master. You knew that I reap, and this is in a question format. You knew that I reap where I have not sown and gather where I scatter no seeds. Is this really what you thought of me? Is this really, you really thought I was this kind of person? Well then, if this is true, then you ought to have invested my money with a banker. And at the coming, I should receive not only my own, but I'll receive interest off this. So in this passage, in this parable, we really find the repercussions of this, that this unregenerate slave, this man who claims to be a servant of the master, but yet does not do as the master wishes, does not do anything for the benefit of the master, he's being cast out. And I believe it's verse 30 tells us that he was cast out in eternal torment. So this is something that really happens when we do not use what the Lord gives us. Number one, it really shows that we have a wrong perspective of God. And it shows us that, too, we do not truly have a spiritual, regenerate nature. The second piece here in John 3, and I actually compiled this up from the notes that are available. 1 John 3, you can actually find the notes. I forgot to mention this in the beginning. This video here is I guess as of the time you're watching this, is being uploaded to YouTube. But you can find the link to the notes that I have available for you on the description of this video. So, and that'll direct you to the website where you can find some more PDFs that are in there. So, this other aspect here of 1 John 3:17 and 3:23, this is also really kind of shows our spiritual nature. It says here, "But if anyone has the world's goods and sees his brother in need, yet closes his heart against him, how does God's love abide in him?" Now, what's interesting is this passage. I mean, obviously it is. All of it is. But I actually have the illustration right here. I didn't really plan this, by the way. I thought it was kind of cool how it works out. If anybody has the world's good, I've got a little treasure box with a bunch of coins. We've already concluded that's only about 16 cents, but let's just say I've got about 16 denarii in here. That's 16 days worth of income. If I have the world's goods and I see my brother who is in need, but yet close my heart against him, how does the love of God abide in him? And I'm actually going to give you a better example here if I can get my wallet out. I currently have a Walmart card, which I don't know if it has anything on it. I've got a credit card with some money on it, and I've got my bank card, all of which has money. Well, with the exception of the Walmart card, I don't personally know offhand. I use my bank card to make online payments. I use my bank card to pay my bills. I take care of my bills, before really anything else. Do I always do a good job? No, but they do get paid. So this right here, what you're seeing, these three cards, that's my payments. That's my groceries. That's my bills. That's my gas. That's the things that I need to take care of throughout the week. Now, what I also have here, I'm showing you this so that we don't think I'm a little cheating or whatever. I also have a $20 bill. Okay, that's extra cash. That's stuff to for whatever it is throughout the week. All my bills are taken care of. I've got my groceries for the week. So whatever's in my wallet is extra cash. If I see somebody in need, if I see somebody for whatever it is, let's just say for an example, phone bill, those are about $40. At least mine is about $45, I think. If I see somebody in need, I've already paid my bills. I've already got my groceries. I've got an extra $20. Somebody's complaining, woe is me. I'm not going to be able to pay my bill. I've got $20 in my pocket that I can help. It's not much, but it's something that can help ease their concern. So, if I, knowing full well that $20 is just extra money throughout the rest of the week to use for whatever need arises, if I have the world's goods, spilling my water, awesome. If I have the world's goods, and I see a brother in need, I see somebody in need of some money to take care of whatever need, whatever burden they have, but yet I close my heart against it and I keep that $20 in my wallet, I don't say anything about it, then the question really comes down. This is what John is saying here. how does the love of God abide in him? How am I showing love if I'm not willing to sacrifice that extra $20 and give it to somebody else who may be in need? There is no love there. That's an action of selfishness, of greed. So we really need to think about that. And I don't always have money on hand, but this is just kind of an example. So by keeping that, I am really showing that the love of God does not abide in me, because my bills are paid, my groceries are taken care of, I have my needs met for that week, and I have this money that I'm going to selfishly keep to myself or use for something else of really a lesser importance. Another piece here that we find in 1 John 23, or 1 John 3, same chapter, verse 23, it says, "This is the commandment, that we believe in the name of his Son, Jesus Christ, and love one another, just as he has commanded us." So not only do we do it out of the desire and a new regenerate heart, but we do this because we want to. There's a lot of, really, it's an interesting topic we're not going to get too much into, but we love others not only because it's obligated, not only because it's a command, but we love others because we want to. We want to not only show the love of Christ for them, but we want to also honor Christ through what we do and glorify him. So we have this extra, we have these, and it doesn't have to just be money. This is just really where the passage is focused on. So this is, I guess, the better example. But it could be anything. It could be if you have a spare car, if you've got enough, extra money for gas, if you've got extra food, you make a very wonderful, bountiful meal, to enjoy that night, and you've got more than enough leftovers. Then take those leftovers and give them to somebody who doesn't have anything. Somebody who's just having ramen noodles for dinner. Say it's like, hey, I've made all this food. I've got this turkey here. I've got this ham. I've got a couple extra burgers. I made too much spaghetti. Whatever you have. Say it's like, I've got these extras. Does anybody else want it? I don't need it. So by doing that, we really show the love of God. Now, the next question I want to bring up: what are we doing when we meet the needs of others? And I'd actually like to word that a little bit different. What are we doing, or what are we not doing when we do meet or fail to meet the needs of others? There's two passages in which we're going to be going over here for this piece. Matthew 25, verse 40. Now, in this section here, Jesus is actually talking about taking care of those in prison, taking care of the widows, taking care of the poor and the needy, the general principle of looking after these people. So the first verse, after talking about the individual, the ones in which you are taken care of, he says, the king will answer them, "Truly I say to you, as you did to one of the least of these, my brothers, you did it to me." So in other words, in a childlike mind, I guess we could probably throw in there, is what you do for another Christian, you're doing for the Father. You're honoring the Father. You're glorifying the Father. You're the Father himself. He says, okay, I'm providing all of this. And I think this is really where we miss the mark. We think that, I hope somebody else can do something for you, or I'll be praying that God meets your needs. But really what we fail to realize is God has provided the needs of the community, for the community, by the community. You look at a church, it's filled with, so many different people. You've got somebody, like I said, somebody who's struggling to meet certain bills. One person is failing, but yet another person has extras. So that other person, God has provided. But they need to be willing, one, they need to be introduced to the issue so that they can know that the issue is there. And number two, that heart needs to recognize the selfish greed and abolish that greed and be willing to go over and to help that person. So I think really, not church communities, not all of them have enough people to meet individual needs. Or at least, as far as skill, ability, and resources. It's not that, I'm not saying that every church has the ability to meet these needs, but what I would say is that there is enough people to do something. And I gotta say, honestly, my concern is that we use prayer as a scapegoat. You say, okay, well, yeah, you've got that struggle there, whatever it is, I'll be praying for you. And then he says, like, you've got such amount of money in the bank. You were just telling me about some bountiful feast you're going to do. You just bought yourself a new car and telling us that you're trying to sell off this other car. Why don't you give this? I mean, freely give this. Don't just sell it. Freely give this to somebody in the church because they need it. They need some food. They need some money. They need a car for transportation. Give it to them and say, if you want to take payments, take payments. But my personal recommendation to you is to say, hey, here's, using a car for an example, is to say that, hey, I know you're struggling here. I know you can't afford a car. This is my extra. I can loan it to you for a few weeks. Or if you want to buy it, we can set up a payment plan, whatever you can personally afford. And then we'll go from there. So, we have, really in a church community, we have the ability to meet the needs of others. It's just a matter of being willing to do such. So he says here, what you do for them, you do for me. So you're doing this, and not only, and I am pleased that you are doing this. I am being glorified that you're doing this, and this is showing that you have a love for the other believer. But there's a flip side to this too. Matthew 25:45 tells us that he will answer them and saying, truly I say to you, as you did not do it to one of the least of these. Let me get my pointer out here. We're backing up. As you did not do to the least of these, you did not do it to me. So in other words, what Jesus is saying is there was a need that was out there that needed to be met. Those of you that did meet the need, you were doing this for me. You were serving me. Well, how are you serving me? Because I have commanded you to love your neighbor. I have commanded you to take care of them. I've commanded you to have compassion on them. I've commanded you to look after the widows and the poor and the elderly. So when you are meeting these needs, you are doing it for me. But the moment that you realize that you have these abilities and these resources to meet these needs and you fail to do so, then you're also not doing it for me. You see, I love them enough that I've placed you in their care so that you can take care of them. I've done this for the community. I've brought you together. Now I'm asking you all to act together. What happens when we do live sacrificially? I absolutely love this piece. I really do wish I had my Bible with me. It's in the other room. And again, I'm going to pull this up on my phone because I think this is very important. Actually, I think I don't have to. I actually forgot. That's what we have in the text. So when we live sacrificially, when we live to the point that we are willing to help to meet the needs of others, I think this really not only shows that we have a love for Christ, but most importantly, it really shows our nature. It shows that we are a community. And here's what we have in the text. As they devoted themselves to the apostles' teachings and the fellowship of the breaking of bread and of prayer, the awe came upon every soul, and many wonders and signs were being done through the apostles. Now, keep in mind that doesn't necessarily say we should expect these signs. It just says that they happened. Verse 44, and all who believed were together, and they had all things in common. And they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all, and as they had needed. Day by day they were attending temple together. They were breaking bread in their homes, and they received their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor with all people for the Lord. And because of this, the Lord added to their numbers day by day those who were being saved. Now there's a lot in here, and this is all of this here is actually taking place after the baptism, the repentance and baptism of the Jews that are coming into the Christian community. As a result of this baptism, they were devoting themselves to the apostles and their teaching and having fellowship with these people who they now can call brothers and sisters in Christ, breaking bread together, having prayers together. They were a community. And not only that, but it says here, all who believed were together, and they had all things in common. I don't really know what that specifically means. Perhaps that they just had, the fellowship in common. But what's interesting about this, as a result of their regeneration, some of them noticed that they had extras. So what they did is they sold their possessions and belongings, most likely all their extra stuff, and they distributed the proceeds to all. They gave this to the church community. They said, hey, I've got all this extra stuff. I want to give this to the community. And they met the needs. They gave their all proceeds to all as any had needs. So they met the needs of that community, of that group of believers. And that's important that we have today, but we sometimes can fail to reach, we can fail to recognize that. And now, even so, this is the really cool piece. As a result, this is kind of a trickle-down effect, a ladder effect, if you want to go with. First, the gospel's being preached to them. They repent. They're baptized. And after they're baptized, they devote themselves to the teachings of the apostles. And by doing such, by devoting themselves, they're coming in a reverence and awe of the Spirit of God. And they're through this, they're having these faithful things in common, and because of they're coming in more and closer to unity with God, they are realizing, I have these things that I don't need, and Mr. Jimmy over here, he's got this need that needs to be met, so I'm going to go ahead and sell my possessions, I'm going to take the money, and I'm going to give it to him because he needs it more than I do. They didn't barter, they didn't sell, they didn't haggle or trade. They said, okay, here's money, take it. And day by day, because of this, day by day, they were, and this is another result of the regeneration. They were in the temple breaking breads and receiving the food with glad and generous hearts. So they were a community. They were essentially the family. It's not just, we're going to give money to the church and make the church take care of this. I'm seeing that Mr. Joe over there is struggling with this problem. And I'm going to make sure that I can help to meet that need. That's what he was doing. And through all of this, everybody was praising God and having favor with all people. And I want to look that up real quick. To have favor with all people. That's what I'm looking up. A quick Blue Letter Bible app. If any of you don't have it, I would personally recommend it. It's a very wonderful piece. Let's see here. What do we have? Verse 42 through 47. Okay, what was that? Verse 47. Okay, so verse 47, checking the concordance here, praising God and having favor. Okay, here's what we have for favor. Having grace that affords joy, pleasure, delight, loveliness, loving kindness, goodwill. So they were essentially in good favor with one another. They were in fellowship with one another. They gave grace to one another. They were friends with one another, with all people of that community. And because they did all of this, because they were, in fellowship of the Word and the teachings, and because they were meeting the needs of everybody else, the Lord decides to bless them. He says, I'm going to bless you, and here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to add more and more and more to your numbers, and you are going to be a people of my chosen people. So that's what's going on. Now, the next question I have is rather interesting. How will the world respond? You see, this is an interesting one. I was talking in the lesson that I was giving as far as this recording goes today. I gave an example. There's a gentleman at work, at the place in which I work, and he has no problem asking people to cover his shift when he needs to take it off for various reasons. However, there's a problem with that, is that when myself as an example, when anybody needs to take time off, if you go to him and say, hey, man, I've got this issue, or I've got to deal with this, or I've got something going on, I need to take the day off. Can you cover for me? The answer is always, well, find somebody else to take it. If they don't take it, I'll take it. Or, hey, I'm busy, or no, I'm not going to take it. And, some way to beat around the bush. So this is always the response. And it's happened so much that the gentleman's kind of really developed a stigma in the environment at work. So much that nobody really asks him anymore to cover. Hey, can you help me out? Because he's unwilling to help. He doesn't really help out too much. So there's one that really the negative side of that is if people see you not giving, continuously asking, hey, I've got this problem, this problem, this problem, and it's not to say that you have to meet every single need. But if you're a person that continues to say no, 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 eventually people are going to stop asking you. Now you might think that's good, that people keep, they're not putting me under pressure. But what's really happening there is they're getting a negative view of who you are. That this person doesn't care about the compassion. He's not willing to meet the needs of others. He's not willing to help out when it's being asked of him. He's just kind of doing things just to get by through the day. That's all he's worried about. Now, there's a positive side as well. And the positive side to this is that, if we say yes when we're able to, for example, that $20 I pulled out earlier, I have that on hand. If somebody's asking, say, hey, do you got a few bucks that I can borrow? I need to buy myself some lunch for the day. I need to pay my phone bill, the example I gave earlier. Or, I have some other need that needs to be met. If you have it within your power, and time, resources, whatever it is, you need to be willing to make a yes out of that because of what Christ says here in John 13. It says, I give you a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another just as I have loved you. You also are to love one another. Because by this, all people will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Now what's interesting about this is Judas has just left. He's gone off to start his betrayal against Christ. So this command is just given to his community of true believers. He says, okay, this is what I'm going to give you. And so he says, I want you to love everybody. You guys remember how I loved you? How I loved you sacrificially? How I met your needs? How I defended that woman that was going to be stoned? You guys remember any of this? How I saw compassion on the man who had leprosy? How I had compassion on the man who was blind? How I had compassion on Mary when she was full of demons? Well, I didn't have to do this, but I wanted to. I did these things because I love you. And I want to see that you're taken care of. That's essentially the point. And because Christ does this, the ultimate sacrifice, we know, of course, is by laying one's life down for another. Jesus tells us that by the way that if we love others the same way Jesus loves us, by this example, by this kind of love, people will know that you are my disciples. If you have this same kind of love that I have given you, if you have this love for one another. So, and that's a very important piece. We need to be willing to go out and meet the needs of others. And if we're just the gentleman that says, hey, do this, and we're not willing, like the example I gave, we're not willing to, stay over for work or come in early to meet the needs of an individual, then they're going to get a negative stigma. And so we need to really address that, really to recognize that within our own lives. Where are we meeting this need? Now, this is actually, we're getting I really hope this is really painting the picture of of the purpose of the woman with the widow's mite. Because it's not about her giving everything. It's not about her having enough faith. It's not about her giving everything and trusting in God to provide. Because this woman, making sure, okay, we're on the last slide here. This woman, all we know, and I have to actually pull this up, is all we know is she's given all she has. Everything she had to her name, she's pulling that out. And she doesn't even have enough money to live on. Or of any sorts. Verse 4, it says they contributed out of their abundance, referring to the Pharisees and the other higher-ups. But she, referring to this widow, has given out of her poverty. She's poor. She doesn't have much. But out of all of this, she's giving everything, every last dollar she has. So this is kind of foolish for her to do. But the point of this is that Jesus is seeing somebody who is in need. And the people were unable to meet it, or unable in their hearts. Now let me actually go ahead. I want to actually pull a little bit from the previous chapter as well as a little bit from the next section here, so that we can get an understanding of what's going on here. And then we're going to get into our the last passage here that I have on the screen. So Luke chapter 20, starting in verse 45 through the rest of the chapter. And hearing all the people, he said to his disciples, "Beware of the scribes who like to walk around in long robes, love greeting others in the marketplace, and have the best seats in the synagogue and the place of honor at feast, who devour houses for a pretense, make long prayers. They will receive the greater condemnation." In other words, they were all fancy. They were holier than thou in their image, but they essentially robbed from the widow, which is what we have here. And Jesus goes on to say that these people, they will receive the greater condemnation. So then after this, he brings, here's the widow. She's given everything. Everything that she owns, she's given. He points that out. Everything she has to live on. What are you guys going to do about that? This woman has nothing for a piece of bread, and yet you guys are giving out of your wealth. You're giving to the temple. It's more important that you give to the temple than you do to supply the needs of the widow. Now going on, it says, while they were in verse 5 of Luke 21, verse 5, it says, while they were speaking of the temple and how adorned and noble the stones and offerings, he said, so they were recognizing the beauty and the splendor of the temple, or as we would know of the church. The beauty and the splendor and all of these things that you see will come when there will be not one stone left upon another. Not one stone will be left, and all these stones will be thrown down. I'm paraphrasing here. I got my words mixed up there. So essentially, he's prophesying the destruction of the temple, and this happens in 70 A.D. I believe it's Tiberius Caesar comes in and he ransacks Jerusalem, and millions of people die, not only soldiers but men, women, and children as well, civilians. I believe there was a count of probably about 2 or 3 million people that died that day, and this was a judgment on Jerusalem for their hypocrisy. Now, if we go to, I think I actually have this on the, I don't have to throw this up. I did portion it out, I think. Yes, I did. I portioned this out, and I'm going to encourage you guys to, let me actually pull that up on my phone real quick. I want to read that. I don't feel comfortable leaving that out. Luke 7, verse 6 through 13. Let me give you the full context of what's going on. I've got to scroll through here. This is a long chapter. There we go. 6 through 13. Here's what it has to say in full. And he said to them, this is again, referring to, they were so focused on their traditions rather than meeting the needs of others. He says, and he said to them, well did Isaiah prophesy of you, you hypocrites, for as it is written. Hell, my phone just glitched. I've got to go back to that real quick. Mark 7. Okay, so as it is written, the people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. You leave the commandments of God and hold to the traditions of men. And he said to them, you have a fine way of rejecting the commandments of God in order to establish your traditions. For Moses said, honor your mother and father, and whoever reviles father or mother shall surely die. But you say, if a man tells his father or mother, whatever you would have gained from me is korban, and that is given to God. In other words, what they have, all I have is I got to give to God. I can't focus on this right now. My phone just glitched out again. So, really, these people were so focused on the religious tradition so much that they failed to meet the more important needs, such as caring, such as having compassion on the widows and the poor. So this is why this is coming to them. They hold to the traditions of men. And another piece here, this is really the sin. I want to actually get that back because I don't want to give that out just yet. This is essentially why this passage is sandwiched in between some negative connotations towards the scribes and towards the judgment of the temple. The reason this is because he's making known these are the sins of the scribes. And here's the results of this, that because of their sins, because of their greed, because of their self-righteousness, it is resulting in the widow who only has 2 coins to her name. She is forced to give all of it to the temple. And now she's to go home and die because she can't take care of herself. They've failed to meet the needs of the community. They failed to be a people of God. And here's what Ezekiel says. This is what happened to Sodom and Gomorrah. It was a whole trickle-down effect. You can read that in Romans 1. But they failed. They really began to worship false gods, and then that all the way trickles down to committing homosexual acts. But that was not the primary reason for their judgment. We do get sodomy from the word Sodom. That kind of it's a play on words. To be sodomized, it's really just to make known that such perversions are taking place. That comes from Sodom and Gomorrah, but that wasn't essentially. Anyways, so getting on to this, Ezekiel 16 verse 48 and 50 really tells us why Sodom and Gomorrah were sinned, what their sin was, and why they were judged. Or how they were judged. I guess, yes, why they were judged. Ezekiel 16, verse 48 says this, "And as I live, declares the Lord God, your sister, Sodom, and her daughters have done as you and your daughters have done. They've done this, have not done as you have done. Behold, this was the guilt of your sister Sodom. This is her sin. She and her daughters had pride, excess food, prosperous ease, but they did not aid the poor and the needy." So they had pride in themselves. They had pride in their community. They had extra food. They were prosperous. They were very wealthy and had an easygoing life. But the one thing that they did not have, that they did not do, is they did not aid to the poor and the needy. They failed to meet those needs. They were haughty, and because of all of this, they did abominations before me. And because of this, because of their selfishness and their greed and their pride, the Lord himself has judged them, and he says, "I removed them when I saw it." Wow. Think of that. Jesus Christ is pronouncing judgment on Jerusalem, on the temple, because they have failed to meet the needs of the community. And not just that, but they've failed. They've abandoned righteousness for their own gain, for the traditions of men, for the practices of hypocrites, for the practices of the self-righteous, the prideful. They were not a people of God. Though they may have claimed to, their actions really showed otherwise. Now, my challenge to you, these widows' mites, this is not a lesson of faith. This is not a lesson of having so much faith that you put in to the coffer right here. I have enough faith that I'm going to put them in. I'm going to give this to the church. That's not what this lesson is about. This lesson of this passage is really about the meeting the needs of the widow. Not the actions of the widow. Not that she has enough faith, that she's putting everything into it. Not that she's trusting in what God will provide. But that she gave everything. And she probably went home and died. We don't know that. But Jesus reprimands the religious elites, as we would know it, the Christian, the false convert. But he reprimands them because they were so focused on providing for the temple, meeting the needs of the temple, making the temple look beautiful and wonderful, that they failed to realize that there's other needs for this. Let's just say I'm pulling a number out here. The temple itself, or a church, costs $500,000 to build. And this is a huge, massive structure, very beautiful. There's so much room in there. We can make so many other classes. We can build up so many classes, so many groups, have different studies. We've got a place for worship, a place for prayer, a place for other sort of church stuff. But they took that $500,000 to make something so massive, so beautiful, and a monument to the faith. And they failed to realize it's like, guys, we can build a building on $100,000 or $200,000, $300,000. I don't know how much they would cost to actually make. But we can build a small structure to support what we have now. We can provide a building, probably the size of a garage, to meet their community space, a place of worship. We can buy a house, for $100,000, if you want to, and make that the church, make that your church. You have the upstairs, which is where the pastor would sleep. You've got the basement where we're going to kind of store some certain things. You've got the garage or an excess room, which we're going to have that set up, and that's going to be our church community. That's going to be our pulpit. That's going to be where we spend our time in worship. Only $100,000, and we have $400,000 left. What can we do with that $400,000? Well, we have enough. Let's go ahead and give that $400,000, distribute that among the people of the church. But not only that, let's give it out to the community. Let's go give it to a group home or something who might need it, so that they don't have to rely on their 2 copper coins or the 2 mites and then go home and die. That's the real point of the message, of the lesson that we can grasp from the widow and her 2 coins. Not a message about faith, not a message about giving all that you have, not a message about trusting in what God has given you, but really a message about caring for those who don't have much. That's all I have for you guys. That's the lesson itself. I hope you guys enjoyed that. I hope you raise some questions or comments. And I'd love to hear from you. So if you have anything, please feel free to let me know, and we'll go from there. You guys have yourself a very wonderful night, and God bless.